Now, he may be the first convicted criminal to occupy the White House, but Donald Trump says he was saved by God to make America great again. He used his inaugural address to declare that America's decline was over and pledged to completely reverse the actions of his predecessors. With many fearing 4 years of retribution, one of Joe Biden's last acts was to preemptively issue pardons protecting several members of his own family, as well as prominent past critics of Donald Trump who could be caught in the crosshairs. The new president is wasting no time in getting down to business, announcing that he will sign a flurry of executive orders today. 10 specifically aim to crack down on immigration to the United States. He will announce a national emergency at the US-Mexico border, send US troops there and start the mass deportation of illegal migrants. Mexican drug cartels will be added to the US government's list of foreign terror organizations, and he will seek to end birthright citizenship for children of migrants and asylum seekers born in the United States, a move that some legal scholars say is unconstitutional. Other executive orders will roll back diversity, equity and inclusion policies and target transgender rights. The new president also plans to declare a national energy emergency, ramp up domestic energy production and pull out of the Paris Agreement on climate change. Well, let's bring in our Washington correspondent, Siobhan Kennedy. Siobhan.
Well, Matt, as you can imagine, this was not your typical inauguration speech, not just because it was indoors. It sounded, as ever it does with Donald Trump, more like a campaign speech with promises, as you mentioned there, of multiple executive orders that he is due to sign over the next several hours, including, he has just mentioned, probable pardons for the January the 6th rioters. A promise, he said at one point, to rename the Gulf of Mexico as the Gulf of America, if that's even possible. Even, he said, to plant the stars and stripes on Mars. He called himself the great peacemaker and unifier, taking promise for the ceasefire recently in Gaza. And Donald Trump said that today was a moment, an example of everything that was possible in America. He said, many people thought it was impossible for me to stage such a historical political comeback. But as you see today, here I am, the American people have spoken. Yes, they have. It's happened today, and here is how the historic inauguration played out.
The Honorable Donald John Trump.
At 1 minute past noon local time, Donald Trump capped off a political comeback unlike any other in American history, completing his triumphant return, almost with a kiss, as the 47th President of the United States.
Please raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear
that I
The sub-zero temperatures had brought the ceremony inside to the Capitol Rotunda for the first time in 40 years, to witness a spectacle that seemed unimaginable not long ago, that the twice impeached, criminally convicted Trump would somehow claw his way back to the highest office in the land. Yet here he was, doing precisely that.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations, Mr. President.
His inaugural address that followed struck a far less angry tone than the Trump of 2017. Gone the talk of American carnage, but the picture was still one of a country in decline, in need of a nationalist reboot and rescue.
The golden age of America begins right now. From this day forward, our country will flourish and be respected again all over the world. We will be the envy of every nation, and we will not allow ourselves to be taken advantage of any longer. During every single day of the Trump administration, I will very simply put America first.
The ceremony took place in the very hall his supporters had ransacked 4 years ago. No mention of that, but instead a reference to the failed attempt on his life.
My life was saved for a reason. I was saved by God to make America great again.
To the amusement of Joe Biden, Trump promised a return to what he called common sense government, with the deportation of millions of alleged criminal aliens, the rolling back of environmental policies, and even retaking the Panama Canal, among a string of executive orders to land on day one. Earlier in the day, and in keeping with a tradition that Trump did not afford the Bidens 4 years ago because he'd left town ahead of the inauguration, the president-elect and his wife Melania were welcomed at the White House by the outgoing President Biden and First Lady Jill. Welcome home, Biden graciously said as he greeted the man he insisted only last week he could have beaten had his party not forced him to step aside. If she was excited about the prospect of another 4 years, Melania certainly didn't show it. And this, surely a photo for the ages. Biden next to the man he's labelled a danger to democracy, and Trump alongside the man he's dismissed as the worst president in America's history. Presumably that wasn't the topic of conversation between the two oldest commanders-in-chief as they drove together through the icy streets of Washington, D.C. en route to the Capitol.
Good morning, sir. How are you this morning?
Good morning.
Trump entered, followed by Kamala Harris, the woman he beat by a mere 1.5 percentage points, even as he insists his victory was a landslide.
Present arms!
But everyone's playing nice, just about, even Hillary Clinton, who also lost to the brash billionaire in 2016.
The Honorable George W.
President
Bush,
George W.
accompanied by
Bush
Mrs.
and wife Laura were also there, though President Obama came alone, his wife Michelle choosing not to attend today's swearing-in.
Attention!
Also making a solitary entrance was Mike Pence, the former vice president who fled for his life on January the 6th, 2021, as the pro-Trump mob stormed this very building, calling for him to be hanged. The gravity of the moment was probably not lost on the pair of defeated Democrats, Biden and Harris taking their last presidential walk together, a moment that lip readers will no doubt scrutinize for years to come. Inside were the men Biden last week labeled the new oligarchy, the tech titans like Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook, Jeff Bezos of Amazon, and Google's Sundar Pichai, and the ever-present Trump whisperer Elon Musk, all of whom are now standing proud with their MAGA president and rewarded with prized access after donating millions of dollars to his inaugural fund. As they gathered, Joe Biden's White House unveiled his final act, preemptively pardoning members of his own family to escape what he called the partisan attacks of Donald Trump. That, of course, won't be the legacy of Biden's half-century in American politics. Instead, having promised a bridge to a new generation of Democrats, Biden will forever go down as the president who instead handed the country back to Donald Trump.
Siobhan Kennedy reporting there. Well, in his inaugural address, President Trump declared that the entire nation is rapidly unifying behind our agenda. Hordes of Donald Trump's supporters braved the bitter cold to descend on Washington for the inauguration. Many are now at the Capital One Sports Arena, which is hosting the inaugural parade. And there's no shortage of MAGA hats and merchandise on display. But elsewhere in this very liberal city, US flags were burnt at a counter-demo by others not so happy at President Trump's return.
Father, you re-elected Donald J. Trump.
And so they came from all over this vast country to witness an inauguration like no other. Yes, the ritual hasn't changed much since the creation of the Republic, and yes, every president promises to reboot America, but few have pledged to transform it like Trump, and they expect nothing less.
Economic growth, less government. Get the immigrants out, deportation.
Deportation, when should that start?
Today.
I'm hoping for him to basically shut down all this illegal send him out of this country, I'm sorry about the language, but no, clear him out of this country and get us straightened out.
They being?
As far as all the illegal immigrants and all that. They came here wrongfully.
Trump hat.
I tend not to idolize humans. I'm sorry, I'm not one of those people. God's supreme. However, I feel like in how he's designed, he's just designed to kind of brute force, make it a good country for the entrepreneurs. He just wants it to be healthy. We need an economy that thrives. And all this other crap has gotten in the way of a good economy.
So is he going to remake America?
Ooh, remake. I would say that he's probably going to pull the Constitution forward so that it applies today.
Are there any dangers? I mean, there are people worried that he's going to be too authoritarian, he's going to go after his opponents.
I have a feeling that in his first thing, I think he was just himself, and I just think that he's matured. A lot of people were praying for that, and he's matured in a way that is healthy and hearty, and I think he has more to go, but we're all in it with him.
As soon as he signs in, he's going straight to work.
Yeah. 200 executive orders, we're told, today.
Oh yeah, he gets her done.
What's the most important thing he should do?
Safety, seal the border.
Seal the border.
Yes, absolutely. Same, looking for change.
Right.
A lot of change.
And if change doesn't come?
Oh, it'll come. It's coming. The hammer's coming.
The hammer's coming.
The hammer's coming. It comes at 12:01.
How should Trump change America? What should he do?
I think there's a lot of changes and he's already started to implement them. I'm from the young generation, so TikTok was a great start.
Is he going to change the country beyond recognition? Do you think, will America be a very different country?
I think it's going to be better than it ever was. We're on the road to a golden America.
You see what this saying here? Drill, baby, drill. We need to get our economy going again and get some oil moving.
Is he going to remake America in the way that we haven't seen in recent years?
We're going to rebuild America, not only for now, but for future generations, you bet.
And is that good news for the rest of the world or bad news?
I think it's great news.
Yeah.
We're a world leader, and we've done a lot in the world, and we will continue to do so.
In the name of humanity, we refuse to accept a fascist America.
And then suddenly, in the middle of MAGA mania, a brazen gesture of defiance in a city that has so far submitted to the new political reality.
And what does this day represent to you?
What this day represents is the coronation of a fascist regime. That's what Trump MAGA taking power comes down to.
Trump returns to power with a vengeance and a vision. He feels that he has the mandate to create a very different America and put the world on notice. The merch has reached new levels of the absurd, but who's laughing?
Well, we can now speak to Fred Fleitz, who was Chief of Staff and Executive Secretary at the National Security Council during the first Trump administration. Welcome back to the program, Mr. Fleitz. This speech, and I'm sure you listened to it as much as we all did, does it represent a significant shift for America and indeed for the rest of the world?
Hey, Matt, it's great to be here. I see you were able to find the handful of protesters against the Trump presidency. I might add, there were huge numbers when he was sworn in 2017. The number today was much lower because I think the country is actually more united with Trump. We do have a divided country. There's no doubt about that. But you know what I was really heartened by? As Trump was leaving the Capitol today, he said to Chuck Schumer, who is now the Senate Minority Leader, I wish I could have a better relationship with the Democrats. And we saw a peaceful transfer of power today. And I think it just was a great thing for our country after this very divisive election, after this very divisive Biden presidency. I think Trump has really put out an olive leaf to unite this country and make this country great again.
It was extraordinary watching all the previous presidents sitting in the rotunda on Capitol Hill, especially President Biden. And they seemed to have a fairly amicable relationship. But there was President Trump kind of shredding, rhetorically at least, one aspect after another of the Biden presidency. How is that going down?
Well, look, I give the Bidens a lot of credit. I think that their exit and the way they dealt with Mr. Trump and Mrs. Trump was classy. I think that's what we want to see in our country, a peaceful transfer of power where the incoming and outgoing presidents, even from different parties, are going to be cooperative and civil to each other. That's what Americans want. That really wasn't it really wasn't possible in 2020 for a lot of reasons, the pandemic, questions about the 2020 election. But look, Trump made a speech about all the problems in this country that he thinks were caused by Joe Biden that he's going to solve, and there's a long list of them. I don't think there's any question that our country is less safe, the world is less safe because of Joe Biden, and Donald Trump is going to fix this.
He also said, I'm talking about Trump here, that he will take back the Panama Canal. Does he mean militarily if the Panamanians don't hand it over to America?
I think Trump said that he's not going to tolerate the Panama Canal being controlled by China. He's not going to tolerate the Panama Canal charging exorbitant fees for U.S. ships, including U.S. Navy ships. I think he sent a clear message to the government of Panama that this is something the U.S. is not going to stand for.
And the Gulf of Mexico will now be known as the Gulf of America?
Well, this is a decision that the president made. As head of the executive branch, he has the power to make decisions on geographic names for the U.S. government, and this is a decision that he's decided to make for the former Gulf of Mexico.
I mean, I just wonder to what extent you think, as a foreign policy expert, much of what he said today was performative, was presidential theater on the big day, and how much of it will actually be put into reality?
I think a strong and decisive American president is what the world needs. It's good for American security, it's good for global security, and I also think in foreign policy, success breeds success. And if the release of these hostages by Hamas, which would not have happened if Trump had not been elected, is successful, if we get a lasting ceasefire that is fair to Israel and its security, I think this can open many doors for progress in resolving disputes around the world, starting with the conflict in Ukraine. So I think that the world should be happy that America once again has a strong and decisive president, and let's see what happens.
But he's put the world on notice, hasn't he? I mean, including some of America's oldest and best friends, including us in Britain. The message seemed to be, you're either with us or you're against us.
You know, I was really struck by how the president has tried to reach out to China. He spoke to Chinese President Xi. He invited Xi to the inauguration. Xi sent his vice president. So we hear all this tough talk about China, including from some people coming in to the Trump administration. But Trump wants to engage in dialogue with China. He'll be tough with China, but he also wants to improve relations with dialogue. So I don't think I completely agree with what you just said.
Okay, well, we'll be watching it. I'm sure we'll be talking again. Thank you very much, Fred Flight. This is a lunch for the great and the good and the president, who's just arrived, in the rotunda on Capitol Hill, close to where the actual inauguration ceremony took place. There we go, sitting next to the First Lady, Melania Trump, who's wearing an extraordinary hat, which I think made it very difficult for him to kiss her earlier on, but maybe that's not an intended fashion statement or anything else. And there we are, in the wonderful rotunda of Capitol Hill. Of course, they moved everything inside for the swearing in because it was just too cold outside. Although I have to say it's warmed up a little bit since then. There we go. And what a speech it was. Well, let's discuss the speech that we just heard that the world was listening to with Heidi Ganahl, a businesswoman and former Republican nominee for governor of Colorado, and Lauren Windsor, who's a political consultant, filmmaker, and self-described advocacy journalist. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
It's amazing to watch all these Silicon Valley and other billionaires, having lunch at the moment with President Trump. What do they have in common, Heidi, with all the millions of people who voted for him who are not billionaires?
Well, I think we all were ready for some change, a different direction for America, one that unleashes innovation and provides people hope and prosperity. We want to get the economy going again. I think that's the most important thing to the billionaires, but also bring safety back. People are so concerned about safety right now with what's happening at the border and in our own communities, especially in Colorado. We've got Venezuelan gangs in Denver. It's an issue in every city across the country.
The speech seemed to me less angry compared to the one he gave in 2017 when he talked about carnage in America. But there was still that spirit of vengeance, if you like, going after people who don't like this country, whether they're criminal gangs or unfriendly countries, and also a real plan about how to change this place.
Yeah, I think he laid out his plan very, very specifically and told us exactly what he's going to do. And part of it is, making lawfare not okay and fairness. Americans care deeply about fairness. We don't like it when people aren't treated fairly, and that's how a lot of Americans feel right now about the last 4 years. So,
right.
Yeah.
Lauren, you're not a great fan of Donald Trump's, if I remember correctly. Are you going to be treated fairly as a critic of Trump?
I don't imagine so, but we'll see how that plays out. I mean, he said that he's going to rebalance the scales of justice and take away the weaponization from the Department of Justice. But
what did that mean, by the way, to you?
That means to me that, you're going to have a lot of litigation, vengeance against people who sought to hold him accountable for January 6th. I think that's, really underlines why Biden had to grant pardons to General Milley and also to Anthony Fauci because of the threats of, payback from Donald Trump.
Heidi, it is extraordinary that the outgoing president had to pardon all those members of his own family and other people. And, the head of the CDC, Anthony Fauci, was trying to deal with COVID. I mean, that does tell you something about what they're afraid of Donald Trump will do to them.
Well, to us, it tells us that somebody's guilty. So when you have to pardon someone, that means that they're in danger of being guilty.
I thought it was the other way around.
We
Innocent
can
or
say
proven
the
guilty.
same thing about the last administration with Roger Stone, Paul Manafort, and everyone that Trump pardoned. Every administration has their pardons, and every party criticizes it as, that's an administration of guilt, an admission of guilt. He did not
pardon his own family going out of office last time, and boy, were they under attack at the same time. But I'm really hopeful. I think the speech was filled with lots of inspiring information about how we're going to turn things around. Those of us that are parents are really worried about our next generation and making sure that our kids have a secure and safe future and a prosperous one. One of my favorite moments of the event was when Usha and JD's little daughter had the Band-Aids on her fingers and was messed. I was like, this is just a really neat family that's coming in and going to set the stage for the rest of us.
And that did all look rather touching. But if you're the parent of a transgender child, and he has said very clearly, from now on, America will not recognize anything more than two genders. I mean, you're going to be very worried, aren't you? This is a real blow to you.
I don't think they have to be worried. I don't think they have to be worried. I think fairness means fairness for everyone.
I mean, I would be worried if I had immigrant children who were born on American soil who, by the Constitution itself have citizenship rights. And Trump has said that he's going to revoke citizenship, which he's not able to do because it's a constitutional right. So I'd like to see how that's going to be carried out.
Lauren, what about the 300,000 children that are missing, potentially human trafficked, that no one can account for? That's terrible. That can't happen anymore.
Lauren, he said that he would try to unite America, although he didn't use quite as much of a speech as presidents normally do to talk about unity, right?
I mean, I don't think a speech about unity.
Do you take that at face value? I mean, is he trying to unite it? And
when you use the term
join
like
the Unity Party?
Liberation Day, that henceforth, January 20th, 2025 will be known as Liberation Day because America is basically this terrible hellscape when, inflation is at lowest compared to countries around the world under Biden's leadership. We've had record economic growth and job growth. And, I think that he paints it that way very conveniently. He's being handed over a very strong economy compared to the rest of the world after what happened with COVID and his botched handling of the COVID response.
Lauren, I think you definitely live in D.C. because Americans do not feel like the economy is strong right now. Everyone's feeling it at the gas pump. They're feeling it at the grocery store. It's painful right now.
I mean, and listen, I know that inflation was a big problem. It is in many countries around the world, and people really felt that. But what he was calling for was a transformation of this country. And, he wasn't elected with a landslide. I mean, it was a convincing victory. The numbers stacked in his... It was convincing, but it wasn't a landslide. And almost half the country would not agree with him.
Winning the 7 swing states is incredible. That's a huge statement to the rest of America.
It was a landslide victory if you look at the numbers.
Yes.
Okay.
It was like 1.5%.
Yeah.
You guys, he won in a resounding way, and
No,
Americans
disputing that he won. But you can't call it a landslide.
I do.
If it's 1.5%.
What about humility and victory?
I think his speech was very uniting and very hopeful and very positive about how we're going to approach the problems that we're facing today.
You can't with a straight face say that he has any humility whatsoever. I mean, at least that's part of the reason that people love him is because he's a braggart.
Before the election, there were an awful lot of Democratic candidates who were talking about him being a fascist and a dictator and so on. I mean, there's been very little criticism of him. There was one flag being burnt today that we saw on the streets, but, no mass anti-Trump demonstrations. Is the opposition to Trump pulling its punches?
I think that people are tired. I think that the resistance to Trump this time around is not going to look like the resistance the first time around. And so...
What's it going to look like this time?
I think that it's going to be more measured. I think it's going to be more strategic, smarter. And, I just think that people are, holding their powder dry.
And briefly, will all these billionaires...
That's way to say it.
Very quickly, Heidi, will all those, alpha male billionaires like Elon Musk, will they carry on being his best friends, or will they all fall out with each other?
I think as long as everyone's focused on one thing, and that's making America more prosperous, stronger, and safer, we're all going to be on the same page.
Okay. Heidi Gunnell and Lauren Windsor, thank you very much to both of you for coming onto the rooftop here.
Well, good evening from Davos, the mountaintop town in Switzerland, where business and political leaders meet each year to, as they see it, try to improve the state of the world. This year, though, they've got a problem because Donald Trump has made absolutely clear he's not interested in the old world order that delegates here used to preside over. So I've been taking the temperature here about what Trump 2.0 means for the global economy and security. Just before we came on air, I sat down with Davos regular Ian Bremmer, an American political scientist, author and entrepreneur. And I began by asking whether the global business and political elite of Davos were feeling rather left out in the cold as the new US president forges a new world order without them.
He's not just forging a new world order. Donald Trump is actually unraveling the old world order, which was an American world order. I mean, it was the United States. What done it after World War II and after the Soviet Union collapsed? And so it's really unheard of that, a country would work to undo its own order. Usually, you look to undo somebody else's order. But Americans, not just Trump, but lots of Americans are really not aligned with the idea of the U.S. providing collective security or promoting global free trade architecture and rule of law and democracy, right? They don't accept that. And Trump is the principal both symptom and beneficiary of that reality.
He's a man who's talked about taking over Greenland or Panama. Do you think the world is less safe today with him in the White House?
I don't think a Gaza deal gets done if Harris is the president right now.
So Trump's a peacemaker.
I think the fact that Trump was willing to put credible pressure on both Israel and Hamas if they did not accept his terms was meaningful. And there are people that have been freed today that would still be hostages in Gaza or would still be prisoners in Israel were it not for Donald Trump. And I think that there is a greater likelihood that we will eventually, not soon, but eventually, maybe this year, get to a ceasefire in Russia because of Donald Trump. Having said that, Trump is breaking a lot of furniture. And a lot of that furniture is how we collectively as human beings try to govern our collective selves, imperfectly and very fragmented, but nonetheless. And that willingness to break a US-led global order long-term is going to create far more vulnerability, far more damage. What Trump has done is brought the world to what I call a G0, not a G7, not a G20, but a lack of global leadership, a return to the law of the jungle, where the strong do what they will, and the US is the apex predator, but the weak do what they must. And that we cannot trust that powerful institutions and governments are actually going to exercise their authority over less powerful with responsibility. And I think that's a horribly dangerous place for the world to go.
Just finally, Donald Trump has addressed Davos in person.
We've been here.
Yeah,
he's
doing so virtually, though, this time. I mean, is this place just a little bit irrelevant now?
I think it's possible he shows up in person and surprises everybody. I think he doesn't.
He hates it here.
He doesn't love it, but he loves getting his ass kissed by CEOs. And the fact is, last time he came here, that was what he enjoyed. And so there's a big party going on, and he's missing it. Lots of heads of state he's missing. I mean, now that he's president, it would not, let's put it this way, I wouldn't be shocked if Davos is a little bit different towards the end of the week.
Ian Bremmer, thanks very much. Well, the first time Donald Trump became president, Theresa May was the first foreign leader to visit. Her trip, 7 days after his inauguration, was rather memorable for the awkward images of him holding her hand as they walked through the White House. It is a very different story this time round, though. The new president's close confidant, Elon Musk, is no fan of Sir Keir Starmer's. And if Mr. Trump does impose tariffs on the UK, it would deal a major blow to the so-called special relationship. Well, let's bring in our politics editor, Gary Gibbon. Gary.
They were glued to the screen in Downing Street, in the Treasury, in the Foreign Office, watching Donald Trump's words, keen to know particularly, perhaps, whether he talked about putting up, as he threatened so often during the election campaign, a tariff wall around America. It was going to happen on day one, you remember. Actually, what happened is that someone at a senior level inside the Trump administration put out a word to a wire service 2 hours before he spoke, saying, actually, don't worry, no immediate tariff wall. And so there's been a bit of a collective sigh, perhaps short-lived, of relief around Whitehall about that. There was also no mention of Ukraine, but there are so many headache issues like Ukraine which are going to dominate relations between Britain and Donald Trump. The sensitive one of the Chagos Islands, China, and the strategy that's been forming, the tactics that have been forming inside the building behind me are, one, to try and get a meeting as soon as possible, maybe within the next 2 weeks. Keir Starmer flying over to DC, not expecting a lot of notice of that. He may even throw another state visit in front of Donald Trump, hoping that that smooths relations. But the other bit of the new way of coping with Donald Trump that's being worked on here is basically trying to get most people in the party at any senior level to zip it when Donald Trump says something provocative, which is just about every time his lips move. And then they want to use the pause as everybody stays quiet and tries to contemplate what it is Donald Trump has said, to get behind the immediate provocative words and work out, is there something behind all this that he's actually trying to get? Of course, it's quite possible that he doesn't know himself, but there are discipline questions within the Labour Party about trying to operate like that, because an awful lot of Labour people want retaliation if he said something provocative. And there, in the background, is this other issue of Peter Mandelson. Will Keir Starmer's nominee to be our ambassador to Washington actually have his credentials accepted? Strong suspicion that an awful lot of people around Donald Trump are stirring this pot, as many other pots will be stirred by people there who don't like this regime.